I do want to, of course, now move on into the next session. Australia's regional areas have unique opportunity and challenges in how they can manufacture and use recycled materials and support transition to a local economy. And in this session, we hear from local government and suppliers about the work that's underway, as well as some excellent examples of innovation. Matt Genever, who is the CEO at Sustainability Victoria, will moderate this session. SV plays a pivotal role in Victorian government, industry, with communities to really support that transition, of the state to a circular and a climate resilient economy. Matt, please join with me on the stage along with your panel, and thank you so much. Please join with me to welcome Matt and the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Veena. Let's pour some water here. Thanks, Veena. Thank you for the introduction. I always feel like I need to give the plug and the sell for Sustainability Victoria, but it's always wonderful when the introducer does it for me. Before I get to our fantastic panel today, which is really about embracing some of the regional benefits around circular economy, and also exploring some of the nuance and the difference that comes with working and developing businesses and operations regionally. I did just want to give a bit of a plug out for our the Sustainability Victoria Buy Recycled service. We are fortunate to have a stand out in the trade hall. I don't know how we managed to draw the lucky card, but when you come in the trade hall, the SV stand is the one you see right in front of you. So please, if you do have some time, particularly if you're from a local government, the Buy Recycled service is very much about tailored support for local government, so that local governments can untap the massive opportunity that we have around using recycled content and recycled materials. So the same way the Recycled First policy is supercharging the work we're doing on state infrastructure, the Buy Recycled service is very much about supporting local government to do that. And there's a whole range of tools. There's a procurement toolkit. There's the Buy Recycled directory. There's a number of tools and staff that will support you. So I wouldn't be doing my job as a CEO if I didn't give a plug to my guys and the service. So please check it out. But this, much to my chagrin, this isn't about me and Sustainability Victoria. This is really about understanding some of the regional opportunities that we have in front of us. We've got about 50 minutes here, and I'll be asking the panel some questions and really trying to get them to unlock some of the fantastic knowledge and wisdom that they have from their many, many years of respective experience. There will be obviously an opportunity to ask questions and share your stories and share your wisdom. So please, I encourage you to use the QR codes on your tables, and I'm assured at some stage some really intelligent questions will pop up in front of me, and hopefully we can get to some of those. And I'm assuming that if I don't get questions, then you guys aren't asking intelligent ones. So make sure you put your thinking caps on. But let's get cracking. We have four fabulous panellists. Glenn Gillan, General Manager from Plasgain. Terry Kay, Managing Director of RPM Pipes. Scott Bryant, the Circular Economy Coordinator from City of Greater Bendigo Council. And Peter Murphy, who's the Managing Director of Alex Fraser. I'm actually going to start, Glenn, with you up the other end, and just talk a little bit about Plasgain. So I understand sort of Druin-born is the Plasgain enterprise down in the southeast. So tell us a little bit about your story, about the importance of being a regional business and some of the things you've learnt along the way.
It was a business developed really with a group of shareholders got together and had an ambition to make products from recycled material. So predominantly focusing on construction projects. Most materials generally used there are virgin materials, and there was an ambition to go, well, let's try and do it differently. Let's try and do it from recycled materials. So it started with electrical cable covers that are laid sort of the easiest or the most common areas in greenfields, new housing developments. They put 2 light poles up. The cables that run between the light poles get covered with a cable cover. So that's a very sort of simple product, HDPE plastic. Why could that not be done out of recycled plastic? So that was the first product. We also do light poles and lights, so we do solar lights and that sort of stuff. And then more recently, we've got into drainage pipes. So the corrugated plastic drainage pipes, and there's versions out there that are recycled, but the ones that we do with the corrugated version, they're predominantly virgin materials. So again, why should they be done out of virgin materials? Why can't we use recycled materials to make these products? And the bigger opportunity is concrete is still the dominant product, concrete pipes. So we know everyone here would be well versed that the cement industries are very responsible for pollution around the world. So converting those concrete pipes to plastic pipes was a big opportunity we saw. So that's what we pursued. So a range of different areas, and we've got a manufacturing plant out in Druin that manufacture these products. So we use the sort of regional economy story there. So.
And how important is that? How important is it to be a regional business? Is it something that sort of just happened by virtue of where the founders originated, and how do you sort of preserve the regional feel of the business now?
It was just organic that one of the shareholders had the facility there that made sense to, all right, well, we can set the business up there to do those sort of things. It's probably a double-edged sword in the sense that it's more challenging to find labour or skilled labour. The different roles, people have to travel further to get to work. But then those that do live in the region, they're very grateful for the opportunity and to come to work. You know, if you live in Warragul or Druin, which is most of our manufacturing workers live, when they can have a couple of minute drive to get to work. Some guys even ride a bike or walk to work, which is pretty unique. And they wouldn't have those opportunities in those areas. Previous positions, they were having to drive to the nearest hub is probably Pakenham or something like that. So there's benefits to that. The drawbacks are the distances of freighting, to freight materials to, it's the sort of 80-20 rule of construction projects tend to be in the Melbourne metro area, the big construction projects here. All the MRPV work all tends to be in Melbourne metro or Greater Melbourne. So there's greater distances to freight these materials. But you do get buy-in from the local economy, and we try and use recycled materials from the local area where possible to then use what we can get from the area. We can turn into products to then be used in the area as well.
Fantastic. Terry, I feel like it's a great opportunity to bring you in here and your local experience. I'm sure what some of Glenn's saying resonates in terms of the long history that you've got. So RPM Pipes up in Kyabram, very personal family story for you. And you really go back to the beginning. You joined your dad in 1996 and have been along the way for pretty much the whole journey. So tell us a little bit about that story and tell us what keeps driving you and the team to keep moving forward with this great regional story that you've got.
Yeah, Roddy. So the RPM story started back in 1996. We weren't as organised as Plasgain. We had no shareholders, we had no nothing. We had a plastic bottle and we had a pair of scissors. And we started with that. The local curbside recycling system was just starting, and we knew the bloke that had the contract to pick up the bottles from the side of the street, and we asked him what he was doing with them. And that's where it started. Previous to that, we had an earth-moving contracting business. We'd done farm work, and we used a plastic pipe on the end of an irrigation outlet. And Dad's like, oh, well, there's milk bottles getting collected from everyone's house now, but we just use that and make a pipe. Can't be that hard. So we literally sat at the kitchen table with milk bottles and pairs of scissors, cut them up into pieces and made little pipes. So we weren't very well organised. We didn't know what we were doing, but we just had this idea, had this concept, and thought that it's a resource that's being collected now. But like I said, we didn't know anything about it. So our story starts very, very simple, very small scale, very just determined probably to do something, but not really understanding what we're doing. But if you don't start, you won't get anywhere. You won't get to produce anything. So our story is, a little bit different to a lot of other people's stories. And we've just progressed from there, I was only telling a guy before, when we first got our first granulator to cut up plastic ourselves, which was amazing. We got it from a scrappy in Seymour, paid $500 for it. We ran it with a PDO of a tractor because we didn't have the power to run it. It was just, we just slowly built up our business and slowly developed it and, made it into what we've got today. And now we've got a process that we currently, our production, we do about 1.3 million milk bottles a week in comparison, so we've definitely developed a commercial scale operation that is more scalable again. We're doing what we're doing at the minute, but as the demand grows and as the exposure of our company and what we can do and what our product can do expands, so will our manufacturing and production. And being regionally based was basically because that's where we lived. That's where we are. That's our community is around us. People know what we do. It definitely does have its challenges with freight and that type of stuff. But we also use all of our own transport. So we've got our own trucks, and we deliver out product, and we bring back material as well. So we use our truck as a part of our circular economy because it's something that just makes sense. So we try and minimise our disadvantage of being regionally based by doing that with our transport. But so we've come a long way. But it's been 26 years, so it hasn't been a quick journey. At the start, people were, we would go do field days, and they'd just go, "What are you doing that for? It's just a waste of time. Just chuck it in the landfill. Who cares?" And we're like, "No. This is a material source. It's not waste. It's not rubbish. It's material." No, don't worry about it. You'll be right. But things have changed, and they had to change because we couldn't just keep on doing what we were doing. So that's in the crux of it. That's our story. Mum and Dad retired nearly 10 years ago now. So I've been doing this since I was 16.
Wow.
So.
Well, 1.3 million bottles a week. I'm sure you are glad that you're no longer doing that with scissors.
For sure.
Seems like that would be pretty intense. Just before we go on, I just want to touch on, I think both Glenn and yourself touched on some of the challenges, some of the disadvantages, particularly in terms of tyranny of distance and some of those logistics issues. But obviously, I would hope that at some stage in your journeys, you've been like, "Oh, how good is it being a regional business? I love this." What are the benefits? What are some of the advantages that you kind of keep going back to, that keeps getting you up in the morning?
I think it's just the challenge, and there's no script. It's every day's a new day, and also you've got a perspective. Like, I can go home to my house, and we've got 20 acres where we live, so I get to go away from the factory and away from all of that noise and go and have a weekend at home. It's like as if having a little mini holiday, but you're at home. I don't think I would actually like to go back to a home that's in the suburbs and all this extra noise around you, because you deal with that all week and every week. And developing something from scratch, you've got to be across everything, a master of everything. But it's definitely time to away from the factory to enjoy the outdoors and the the open area is definitely, I think, something that's benefited me over the years.
Yeah, fantastic. And Glenn, anything to add from your perspective in terms of some of the benefits, some of the other side of the coin to being a regional business?
One thing that was pretty exciting was partnering with a local cafe, like similar as Terry was saying, sort of to try and get the feedstock, and to I think the future of recycled material is really tracing the feedstock and understanding where it comes from. From our business, we didn't start with cutting up milk bottles on the kitchen bench, but we constantly scour certainly the state for different recycled producers, and there's lots of different places now. I think as part of the the waste export bans, I think that certainly brought on a lot more opportunity and a lot more stock of recycled materials. But to trace that source back, because again, we had, in the early days, we did have one shipment where we were assured it was coming from Australia, and then you see the bags had a product of Malaysia or something on them. And we thought, well, are these just the bags are from Malaysia, or is the product actually come from there? So the recycled space is certainly becoming a lot more professional, but there is still sort of cowboy tactics and stuff that some of the places are, it is waste, it is recycled materials, it is, there can be some shady dealings or whatever going on, and just tracing that source, it's really the difficulty. So what we partnered with a local cafe, again using a milk bottle for an example. Our cable covers, they're just made out of milk bottles. So we thought, well, cafes use a lot of these, so let's partner with them, and we went down to a local cafe and said, do you have milk bottles, or what do you do with your milk bottles? And they didn't even have a recycling pilot, they were putting them mostly in the bin. So I thought, gee, you're not even recycling them into the curbside waste system. So what if we take them, we'll just dump a bulker bag here, that is how we sort of, a big sort of 1 tonne bag. If we just put that out in your backyard, ideally keep it under cover so it doesn't get wet, because that makes it a bit more difficult for us to handle. If you just clean them, because we can't handle it if it's dirty, and you could think if we had 1,000 milk bottles or something with a little bit of milk in them, after a month or so, it's going to be pretty rank. So make sure they're clean. So then this cafe was able, just on the frother, they just, and that'd actually, they'd squirt a bit of steam in them, and that'd actually compress the bottles too, so then they could really crush them right down. And then we got that. So that is a benefit if we were in Metro Melbourne. That might be, there's certainly cafes here, but it might be a bit more difficult to sort of partner in that regard. So that's certainly a benefit.
Yeah, fantastic. Peter, obviously Alex Fraser, different scale of an organisation, largest recycler in Victoria, one of the most significant probably material handling companies in the country, particularly in terms of this audience, getting recycled materials into construction. You guys have driven a lot of the change and innovation that's happened. Your story as an organisation, 150 years, obviously now part of a sort of bigger company again. What are some of the ways that you and your business continue to work with regions and building some of the more local circular economies that we're seeing starting to emerge around?
Look, I think the key to our business is not much different from the key to many. I suppose it is important. We have to remind ourselves, if you get into this patch, that people don't generally buy your product just because it's recycled, and so there's and that's not news to any of these guys, I'm sure. That there's people who are interested in that element, but in the end, your customers also have really important targets about cost and timeline and specification, and you need to help them hit all of their objectives, and the environmental outcomes is one of those. And so I think understanding for the customer how they are ranked is important, and you'll certainly get people use tools like Buy Recycled or be guided by things like Recycled First, but that in itself is not enough to sell a product on a consistent basis anywhere that I've found. And so and then our business in, say, a place like Brisbane is different from our one in Melbourne, where the market's a bit different there, the scale is a bit different there, and so right-sizing that is important. We get things like glass transported a long distance to us, and I think in the regional challenge is that's a logical place to use it. Probably doesn't make sense to transport it back if you're in the regions and you've got a good local source of sand. That it's not necessarily logical to transport glass all the way from Melbourne back to there just so that you can say you've used recycled glass as a sand. You've got to find what is the logical way to do stuff, and I think as pretty practical people in the regions, if you try and mandate the forced use of something, then it creates a bit of distortion and waste and cynicism. So it's a bit of that right sizing. What's the practical solution here?
Are you seeing some of those things emerge? Again, you've been part of this business for a long time.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in the regions? Are you getting calls from customers, councils, or others that want to talk to you about what you're doing? Sort of how are you seeing that shift in regional areas?
There's a huge interest in it because they do see what's happening, in the big metro areas, and they're trying to figure out what's a logical version of that in each region. And I think it's got to be a nuanced approach. There's some of the material that we handle, you can stockpile it for quite a long. If you stockpile it well and it's well supervised, and you're not creating a headache for the community, you can stockpile it for quite a while and campaign it. Maybe that's that's in the kind of materials we handle. Councils have got to be prepared for that to happen in their patch and provide, make sure that the planning and whatever allows for that to happen in their patch. But it can be quite a sensible bolt-on to another business that's doing some kind of aligned activity. So there's certainly interest in it. It's a matter of finding a way to right-size it for each patch. Yeah.
And I mean, we're inevitably going to get to you, Scott, and I feel like you're the only council up here, but such an incredible, important part of the regional supply chain, and indeed, through the work we do in biorecycled and the local government package, there's no doubt that regional local governments are the drivers behind a lot of this. Doing some fantastic work, City of Greater Bendigo, evidenced last year when the city won the Premier Sustainability Award for Circular Innovation, so congratulations. So you're right at the coalface of this. Talk us through some of your experiences in this area. Talk us through some of the things that you're working on at Bendigo and how you are building some of those regional circular stories that everyone's really keen to hear about.
Thanks for the kind words, Matt. And I think for local council officers in the room, I appreciate the pressure on the shoulders here, being the only representative. But I guess what I'd start off with first is, I guess from a regional perspective, regional Victoria, and this is a microcosm of regional Australia more broadly, that's quite a broad term in terms of Bendigo, 150 kilometres from the outskirts of Melbourne. That's quite a different playing field, as it were, to a Mildura, which is a 5-hour drive. And so I guess there are a lot of bespoke local issues that need to be addressed and can be applied only with local knowledge and expertise. But I think coming at it, if we're on the right playing field, I think that certainly helps drive that local knowledge in the right direction. So I guess from a local government perspective, it's a challenge of, on the one hand, we're custodians of materials, what's typically been over the last decades waste management and just cleaning up the mess and making sure it's not a public health issue and making it disappear out of sight, out of mind from your local bins, as well as a community educator in terms of engaging residents as citizens and members of the community to what on earth is circular economy, what is resource efficiency, and why should someone care and what's the impact. Through to Bendigo as an example, organisation of about 1,000 staff members, so I guess probably in the middle of the range for Victorian council standards, and by Queensland standards probably quite small. But in terms of how do we as an organisation adapt our own behaviour, not only to be custodians of the community's wasted materials that we need to try and find better homes for, but also how do we do that ourselves in-house. And so I guess our work's been juggling what do we do with those materials? How do we keep it out of landfill and keep it at a higher use value? And that challenge in the region, I guess, to keep on a regional tangent, is the challenge of the focus in Australia is very much on scale and very much based on, given that we're on a linear playing field, the deck is certainly stacked against circular solutions, or having to play economies of scale game, and oftentimes that congregates itself around large populations of people and residents. So naturally solutions are popping up in Melbourne, and so regional councils are having to engage with good solution providers in Melbourne, but then have those challenges around cost and the emissions from a transportation perspective, let alone the desire to take that responsibility and keep those materials locally. And I guess that's where we've started to try and chip away at that from an institutionalised perspective as a big regional organisation, and look at how do we focus our spend. So I guess for us, that's been looking at, what is the impact of our relatively small in the scheme of organisations here today, but in the region of spending about $120 million a year on procurement. How do we align our procurement to take into account, I guess, what's been touched on earlier in earlier sessions is, at the end of the day, by 2050, the globe needs to be net zero. So how do we bring that into our own organisational practices to, practice what we preach and try and bring in lower carbon and more circular procurement processes into an organisation like a local council that's trying to juggle a whole bunch of different pressing priorities, and reducing budgets, and so looking at how do we bring that into play, and I guess look at the fact that our procurement process is responsible for about 5 times as many greenhouse gas emissions per year as our combined fleet and heat usage combined.
Wow.
So it's those hidden emissions that I think we in Australia are only just starting to look at.
Fantastic. I find it really hard being a moderator because I just want to write notes and I get really engaged, and then I realise I have to follow up with a question at some stage. But that's excellent. And I guess just one question, another question for you, Scott, before I open up to the panel, and other panellists, please feel free to chip in on this. But where do you draw the line, right? Because at some stage, there's this balance between it's important that we kind of treat our materials regionally and we look for the best opportunities we can and try and build regional businesses. But then at some stage you get to the point where you're at the micro end of some of those material streams, and it kind of just, it's just never going to stack up financially ever to do that. So how do you kind of draw that line between, okay, here's an opportunity that really we should be building regionally versus here's something that actually we're just going to have to play in the supply chain, and if it means we're doing business with Melbourne, then that's just the reality of what makes sense. How do you guys sort of traverse some of those decisions?
I think part of that is probably then trying to take into account what's happening more broadly in Australia, so at a state and federal level, in terms of if tomorrow we were deciding as a country we're wanting to big up the local use of materials, we can support this, we can change taxation systems or incentives and disincentives, then we'd certainly lean into that. I think given the current playing field, which is certainly, I guess we're still playing on that linear playing field, it's, I guess, picking those battles, but trying to balance, on the one hand, I think with my circular economy and sustainability hat on, the emissions, what's the bang for buck, and what are the actual outcomes here? For instance, carting materials down to Melbourne to have them processed to be cart back versus using a slightly different local material that could also be recycled, but is perhaps just more basic recycled aggregate rather than a plastic solution, might actually be a better carbon outcome, versus what are the opportunities to actually create additional local jobs, value for the community, and also that sense of ownership of these materials. Because I think if we're purely focusing on those economies of scale and the lowest price without having a hat of what's the social and ethical benefit locally, we're missing out on the multipliers of actually keeping that spend locally. So I think you'll see a lot of local councils have competing weightings and I guess priorities, in terms of it's no longer just about how do we get the lowest price for the community, but also how do we take into account needs for First Nations priorities, or through to social and business development locally, through to having that circular economy or emissions lens. And I think it's, the fact is there's never going to be a perfect solution, but it's really trying to effectively select as a society or as a community what are our priorities, and trying to work towards those.
Yeah, fabulous, thank you. And I think you opened the door really nicely to a conversation about procurement, which is, let's be honest, fundamentally important. It's important in metropolitan Melbourne, but as I said before, the vast majority of buying decisions across regional Victoria and regional Australia are going to be made within a local council. So let's focus on that a little bit now, and the procurement process and sort of some of the perhaps differences and opportunities in regional procurement. So from our industry trio, just really keen to get some of your experiences around how working with councils on procurement for your products and opportunities is going, and where you think things are working awesome, and where you think maybe there's some opportunity for industry and local government to be a little bit more aligned. Pete, I feel like you're champing at the bit for this one, so maybe I'll start with you.
Look, I think that local government's got a challenge to stay away from the extremes in terms of procurement, and but we still have. There's still some government agencies, not in Victoria, so no one in the room need worry. There's still some big government-owned entities, and still some enormous contractors and developers who want to be able to get rid of their materials from something like a demolition or construction process very, very cheaply, which means they want them to go to someone like us. But they refuse to buy them back. And so that principle, that principle is no different to the Chinese government telling us all in 2017 or 18 that they're sick of taking all our rubbish, right? So I think at one extreme you've got players in the industry who want to be able to get rid of their waste but not buy it back. So that's obviously, there's an extreme that council needs to stay away from. If they're not buying it back, then they are part of the problem. If they're not providing some avenue or some encouragement to buying it back, then I'd say they are part of the problem, because they are just, I think Kevin Devlin or someone had the picture of the yellow top wheelie bin here earlier today. They are just encouraging people to put it in the yellow top wheelie bin and then waving goodbye as the truck heads down the street, and that ends up in fires at Coolaroo and stuff like that we saw a few years back. So that's one extreme. I'd say the other extreme, though, that you do see some entities headed towards is mandating it. And mandating you must use whatever, a certain percentage of something in something, or a certain material or whatever. And I think that potentially creates horrible distortions, creates a lot of cynicism in your customer base, that they're being potentially kind of forced to use something. And the silliest example I've seen of that, we have a site just near the Brisbane airport at Nudgee, and one day a truck arrived from Mackay. Now, for those not familiar with Queensland geography, that's about the same as carting a truckload of concrete, probably from past Sydney to Melbourne. And it's because someone had interpreted the specs to say where there's a recycling service available, it shall be used. And they did, over the next few weeks, all these truckloads of material from Mackay to Brisbane for a really simple product like concrete. And that's, I think, that's an example of mandating gone to the lunatic level. And so I think the challenge for local government is, how do they stay away from the extremes? How do they use tools like Buy Recycle to support their kind of buying decisions? Have they got something in place that's equivalent with Recycled First that says, show us where the opportunities to use this are, and what would that cost? Why wouldn't we use them? And does that early in the procurement piece? And so I think that's, there needs to be a version of that locally. And I think the early engagement, and again, Kevin Devlin touched on, the kind of standardising. Too often you see a local government that wants to run a trial on something that has been used for 20 years. But because it hasn't been used in that jurisdiction, they want to run a trial on it under a footpath or in a very low level application. And that's just a terrible way to make progress. There's not many other avenues of society where we trial it in our area. We don't trial cars in each local government jurisdiction. We depend on the experience of other entities to have decided, is that a practical way to go? And so I think that's a challenge for local governments. They're often short on resources anyway. Leverage as much as possible what has been seen to work elsewhere.
Yeah, excellent views there, Pete. And you're right. I think there is a tendency to over-test. Yeah, but we've never used it on a 45-degree angle in this particular setting. So you're right. I think we need to sort of take that leap of faith, knowing that the evidence is there. The evidence has been there for 20 years in many cases, and just get moving. Glenn, what about some of your experiences in the local procurement chains? What's worked well, and where do you sometimes find roadblocks?
Well, probably similar. What has resonated, councils will think or believe that their council jurisdiction, there's a solid wall around the confines of that council, and what happens over the other side of that wall is completely different soil conditions or completely different world, or whatever the case may be. And it's very difficult to, like just using our pipes, for example, we might have a pipe approval for a number of different councils, but then other councils say, no, similarly, they want to do a trial or they want to do something. Well, can't we just use the information that's been used over there and shortcut all of that? And similarly, as you say, strain on resources, all that sort of stuff. Maybe standardised systems. I know there is discussion with different bodies to try and create standardised systems or specifications or whatever the case may be across a state or across, and some of the examples from Queensland, I understand Queensland does that a bit better, just the way their council geography is set up. They tend to have much bigger council regions than we do in Victoria. So maybe something like that would certainly be of benefit, which would then encourage innovation. So at least you know what the goalposts are. If you go into one council, it might say, oh, we want this specification to be met, and this one says, no, we want this specification plus X, Y, Z. And it's not until you get there that you sort of understand what their requirements are. So if there was a bit more uniformity, that would certainly make things a lot easier, not only to supply, but then also to assist with procurement and growing businesses, and then also the investment back into a company to invest in the next product that we want to make, and putting more recycled material into it or something, because some of the specifications, the way they're written, do discredit recycled materials. They might be so very specific on a certain property that is very difficult to be used when there is a percentage of variability when you use recycled materials. So they do tend to lend themselves to virgin materials, which does block and stifle innovation.
Terry, and just to finish off, any different observations from you?
No, pretty much the same sort of thing. I think too that on a local government level, things are changing and adapting so fast, and they haven't had to change and adapt quickly in the past very much. You know, with the emphasis now on circular economy and that type of stuff. So, just to give you a little example of a real life experience that we had was when we got our Department of Transport roads approval. We done all the Australian standard testing required to be used on major road projects. Our local council, I went to them and said, here, we've got all this testing done now, we've done all this, we've spent all this money, we've been doing it for 22 years at that stage, you know, so it's not as if we turned up last week. And they said, oh yeah, but you know, you're not in our guide. And I said, so how do I get in your guide? Oh, you've got to be used. I said, so you can't use me because I'm not in your guide, but for me to get in your guide, I've got to be used. So how do I get in the guide? And I said, and is that level of testing more than the Australian standard that we've just complied with? Oh no, but you're not in the guide. You know, sometimes you feel a bit sorry for the person because you just think, well, you're stuck in the middle, but man, that's a crazy concept. Like, how can an Australian standard be superseded by a guide that the local government, that the local councils put together? You know, oh, we've had 15 councils and this is our infrastructure guide. Well, update it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that hard,
and move on. Like, come on. If you want people to innovate and develop and invent products, man, you've got to use them. Otherwise, they won't be there. You know, and local government have got a big thing a big role to play. You know, where the MRFs are. Like Bendigo's got a MRF, Echuca's got a MRF, Wangarata's got a MRF. We use material from all those MRFs. So you know, it's a perfect circular economy process to say it comes from here, it goes to there, it makes it in a pipe, and we put it back here in that park. You know, and that's telling people a real story. You know, it's a real thing. You know, there's no need to hide it. You know, we should be proud of it, but sorry, can't use it, not in the guide. You know, that's pretty frustrating.
So, Scott, again, I feel like I've inadvertently set up a you versus them scenario here, which was completely unintentional. So maybe instead of asking for a rebuttal...
I'm happy to...
I think maybe the question is, you and I as public servants of a type know it's not quite as simple as that, and risk and reward is often something, it can be a difficult conversation to have. So perhaps... how are you seeing things change, and what helps you and what helps some of your fellow local government officers in terms of making decisions like the ones we've spoken about today, and sort of picking the pragmatic choice? What's of benefit, and how can we support that?
So I guess just before I get onto that, I would say I don't disagree with anything that's said by any of the other panellists today. So I think they're all very fair, and it is this challenge, I think, of, well, I guess what would help is, I guess there's a lack of, not intended, but there's a lack of accountability for certain outcomes in terms of if services are delivered, bins are collected, sports fields are available, certain social services are available, and everything's rough and the roads are okay, then from a council perspective in terms of what residents are complaining to councillors about and what executive managements within councils are concerned about, that's the priorities in terms of that there's no raging mobs in the street being angry with the performance of the council. But so from a sustainability and a circular economy and a recycled content perspective, the challenge is trying to get that accountability. We have circular economy and zero waste policy, which is effectively circular procurement. We've got circular economy targets in terms of embodied carbon and scope 3 emissions embedded in our climate change strategy for 2026 and 2036. But if there's no accountability at an executive level for this isn't a priority, so if we miss it, it doesn't matter, or I'm not going to get annoyed at a particular officer in our works team because they've got so many projects to deliver that if the spec isn't updated and therefore they're actually perversely rejecting a recycled content product, even though we as an organisation are saying, we want you to preference this and we'll give you a price bonus on this, then yeah, the challenge there is, I think, from a top down is really how do we make local governments, as the 79, many of which are even or are very sparsely popular or resourced, especially in rural locations versus, say, regional cities or metropolitan locations, is how do we make that, I guess, a priority and a focus? And that's the same for the broader race to 2050 emissions, reducing our overall consumption, not just getting recycled content in there. And for me, that a lot of the guidance there is the Local Government Act for Victoria as an example. And if it's in there, executive officers are focused on, well, how are we making sure that we're meeting that? And so I think within the realms of not being overly prescriptive in terms of specifications and we need exactly this type of product, how do we effectively incentivize local councils to say for our broader purchasing, with infrastructure being a fairly straightforward example, relatively speaking, how do we say we're trying to prioritise ultimately net zero outcomes and then local reuse of materials as another priority? How you make that work as council officers in cooperation with local solution providers is up to you. Yeah. But how do we drive that as you will be accountable to meet this? Because at the moment, it's not at the top of the agenda.
Yeah, lots and lots of kind of considerations in there. Now I'm conflicted in three ways. I'm conflicted by the fact that I have 140 questions I would like to ask. I'm conflicted by the fact that the timer tells me I've got 3 minutes and 28 seconds left, and I did ask you all to participate, so it feels like I should go to the screen now and ask some questions from the audience. So, Pete, I might pick on you to start with, because I think that's actually a great question. Is we've spoken about sort of the Alex Fraser kind of vision around your regional presence. So why don't you open satellite facilities in regional Victoria? Is it something you've looked at? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, well, just to be annoying, Matt, I'll do the first one as well.
Great. Okay, perfect.
How do you get consistency across councils in recycled materials? Use the VicRoad spec. There's no reason councils need to develop a whole other specification because they're different from another part of Victoria. I think one of the beautiful things about Victorian specifications is that they are easily interpreted by people in the industry. One of the things VicRoads did on one of their specifications is provide a simple technical note that said to some of those inadvertent kind of barriers that were touched on earlier, it basically said wherever our traditional specification says this, you can use that. They didn't rewrite the spec completely in a rush. They did that in due course, but it made very, very quick traction. And so be cautious of anyone who threatens to standardise a specification or rewrite a specification. Use what's there. In terms of would we set up in satellite areas? Yes, we look at it. It's an incredibly capital-intensive industry. It's an incredibly competitive industry once you're making a product. And so we've looked at it. I think the answer will be you'll see us set up in some places in a different format to what we do now, and you'll see us do it in conjunction with other activities that our parent company Hanson does. So to get the economy of scale, you'll see us align with what our the infrastructure that's already there in our parent company. And I'm pleased to say in terms of regional activities, we've got an incredible measurement discipline. So Brendan Liveris, who's talking tomorrow, and Matt Wilton's talking about what we're doing in terms of concrete. But one of the things Brendan's team have set up is measuring absolutely everything that's important to us. So carbon emissions, concrete comes to your house, complete carbon footprint of where it came from, what plant mixed it, what the mix design is, what truck got it there. Similarly for recycled content. And so which means that on my phone or on my laptop, I get a report all the time, a live report really of where is recycled content being used in concrete nationally in the entire Hanson footprint, and in the top 10 list of all the plants across the country who are using recycled content in concrete is the Hanson plant at Mildura, which is just a fantastic outcome of practical people getting it done, I think.
Excellent. Practical people getting it done. That's great. I am going to take a bit of license here. We've got 45 seconds left, but I think we can squeeze in one question and I'll live with the risk consequences that we spoke about before, Scott. You've got some amazing people in the room. I'm seeing lots of engaged faces, and I'm sure we've got industry, all types of government. We've got construction people in the room. What's your advice? What's your one piece of advice in terms of the opportunities for regional circularity? Glenn, we'll start with you.
I don't know.
Well, you set up a regional business. I'm sure there's.
Well, support. Yeah, just support. There's great things being done in the regions. There's great businesses out there. Just support them. Give them a go.
I love it. Give them a go, Pete.
I think it's, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem, I think. So.
Excellent. I feel like we should be writing a guidebook to these one-liners. Terry?
I think it's just a matter of buying the products that are available now so that companies like us make more products for you to buy in the future. It's available, it's a stepping stone. Who knows what it's going to be like in 10, 20 years' time. But if you don't support the industry now, doesn't matter if it's, and this is across the board too, no matter if it's regional or metropolitan based, if you don't support the companies that are out there now doing it now, they won't be there.
And Scott finishes off.
I'll cheekily have three. One, at a national level, some sort of price on carbon that's a meaningful price to help drive a lot of these changes over time. Accountability in terms of how do we get accountability into not just local government, but that's a good starting place in terms of these outcomes. And as council officers, just keep throwing yourself against that institutionalised wall. You can create enough cracks to sometimes get some good outcomes happening.
Fantastic. Can we have a round of applause for our fantastic panel? Thanks, guys. Excellent.
Thanks very much, Matt and the panel. Absolutely delighted to hear all of these discussions, very energizing. Wanted us to kind of really reflect on the day today, and what you're seeing, of course, is basically a slideshow that's capturing all the sessions we've had, and I want to acknowledge, of course, the incredible designers who are at the back of the room who've been doing a great job as we've all been absorbing and learning. So what you'll just see on the screen is a bit of a summary of different sessions that we've had. Looking there at Kevin and Alexis and their morning opening session. Feel free, of course, to capture this if you want to, with what you feel you want to take away from what you've learned, and of course those incredible sort of ideas that have been flowing through. We've heard, of course, about what we can do and the work there that Tony Ciccelli talked about, and of course the opportunities, tremendous opportunities for us that we have already available. So, let's kind of learn from each other and see how we might be able to use more recycled content. And of course, we started talking about, of course, plastic and rubber products. Today, this panel discussion hosted by Craig. We had Deb Lau, Lena, and Stuart on that, and really sort of allowing us to think about the fact that, yep, sure, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. And then reflecting further along as we started to see where that bigger picture as to how we kind of navigate and bring all these different ideas to fruition. Connectivity between people who are part of the ecosystem. Again, that word collaboration came up time and time again, but to really hear from experiences from people on the ground. Then as we moved into the afternoon session hosted by Terence and the panelists, we heard such inspiring stories, that kind of global perspective, Betty, telling us about, all the fantastic work that's happening at the grassroots level. How can you not be inspired by many of those stories? And as we were coming closer to the end of the day, thanks, Matt, for your fabulous panel, really to be able to capture what what you can achieve in the regions and the regional benefits and embracing circular economy. But again, fantastic stories from businesses, big and small. I think it is really that collaboration. Absolutely. Hearing from local councils, Scott from Bendigo, for instance, I think to me that's really the whole point here, is that we're all in it together. So it's not about this being put away somewhere else. There's obviously no such thing as away. Again, this is the one planet, so we're all going to have to find ways in which we support each other. And I think time and time again, we've heard very much, it's not just about recycling, it's about decarbonization, reducing our carbon footprint, valuing these materials as resources and raw materials. So we're putting all of these, I guess, slides in front of you, and at the end wanted to really just bring that word cloud back up again, just so that you can probably reflect and take away and see if you would, like to then also challenge yourself and to go, yeah, actually, I did hear of lots of new ideas. So if you want to throw other words in there that you've picked up from today, just, throw those in. It'd be really fantastic to see how this collection of words started out with morning of what you wanted to get out of the conference. Perhaps the next question in there is really, what you're learning as you're listening and as you're being inspired during the course of the day. So we'll keep that momentum going, really kind of that second question in there as we start to ask you to build into this word cloud is, are you actually sort of feeling that inspiration that you're getting from the connections and the collaborations that you're hopefully building over these 2 days, is giving you lots of new ideas, and to take those ideas back to your workplace and to hopefully inspire other colleagues, at your workplace. I had someone tell me in the afternoon, I wish I had more of my colleagues from my workplace there. But you can be the champion in your workplace to drive change and action. And that's really something that, I do want to, remind us all that this is really why we're here. We're here to learn, but we're also here to take away some of these key learnings so that can then be translated into actions. So I do want to just take this moment to be able to say again, thank you for, please join with me in thanking all our speakers and presenters and everyone who was here today. Join us, of course, for afternoon tea in the Trade Hall, and you'll be able to hear from suppliers of recycled plastics and rubber products in the Trade Hall stage. And really, I urge you to go along and listen. We're looking forward again to another energizing day. Tomorrow starts at 9 o'clock for another whole day of exciting conversations and real-world examples of transition to a circular economy. So I want to say, please join with me in thanking our speakers and everyone who contributed to the discussion today. Thank you. So over to the Trade Hall for some good further networking and afternoon tea again. Thank you very much.